Hey guys, and welcome back. I'm absolutely winning today. Not because I liked this book. Oh no, this was my fifth dud in a row. I'm actually thinking of changing the name of my channel to I Read the Book, so you don't have to. Oh no, and it's not because I'm doing my review at a reasonable hour. Absolutely not. It is 11:45 at night. But I'm winning because I finished this book today and I'm doing this review right now. So let's just say Beth gets a gold star. I think I do need to set up somewhere you can donate to a Buy Me a Margarita fund, because that's the only way I'm going to get through these books these days. I just don't, I cannot seem to find a book I like. Today's book is the Paris novel by Ruth Reischl. I think I said that correctly. This again is a book that I picked up because I'm trying to find book comps. I will say I liked this one better than They'll Never Catch Us, which was not a book comp. It was just one that I ended up reading. But I did like it better than Maybe Once, Maybe Twice, which was one that I read, hopefully as a book comp. It quickly became clear to me this book was going to be literary fiction. And we all know I don't like literary fiction. If you don't know what literary fiction is, there's two basic types of fiction: literary and commercial. Literary is more about the art, it's more about character and internal motivation, whereas commercial fiction is more about plot and enjoyment. So I would much rather read a book. I can appreciate a well-crafted book, but I would much rather read a book because it's entertaining than because of the prose. So I did a little bit of research on this author. She is well known within the culinary world, and that's reflected in this novel because there is a lot of culinary aspects. The main character actually becomes a chef herself. And so there are quite a few moments where she's eating food and we get heavy description as to what she is eating, which is fine if you like that. But I thought it was, again, I thought it's very heavy-handed, and I eventually started skipping through it because I didn't need it. I thought she could have done something differently to convey the flavors and emotions and the nuances that Stella, the main character, was experiencing when she was eating. There were certain things that I did like. It's divided into kind of three segments, each named after a particular woman. If you see that, you can sort of see it as the progression. And that's the one thing I did find about this novel that worked well if I were looking at it as a comp title for my book, because Stella, it is a journey of self-discovery for her. So when I look at how it's divided, I'm like, okay, certain chapters are making sense because this is where the focus is. But overall, I thought this book lacked focus. Largely, there was too much going on. One, we have Stella. Her mother has just died. Her mother was not a great mother, not a very great person in general, but the mother had bequeathed her this certain sum of money and said, you need to go to Paris and do not come back until you're out of money. So we have this whole idea. And then we have this search for her father that came out of nowhere. Far too many characters. This search for answers regarding a certain painter named Victoire, one of her kind of best friend characters, and his family drama. And then we have the whole chef thing. Underlying all of that is the journey of self. So I needed to reel back in certain respects and to focus more on other aspects because I couldn't really figure out what the main point was. Maybe all of the little points are the point, because for her to discover who she truly is, she needs to reconcile herself to all these plot points. But I just kept waiting for something big to happen, for there to be this moment of definition of this is the purpose of the novel. There's my biggest thing going in, aside from the fact that it just, for me, literary fiction feels like it's trying too hard, and that's not enjoyable. But let's jump into the meat and the potatoes of it all. As I said, Stella, she's from New York. This book takes place in the early 80s. Her mother, Celine, had died a year prior. This is actually also something that I thought was highly unnecessary. There were aspects of it that were pulled to complicate matters later on in the novel, but as a plot point of its own, I didn't think we need it because it went nowhere. Celine, not a very good mother. She, at the age of 15, said, I'm out of here. I don't want to live with these people anymore. I'm going to go to New York. She goes to New York and she works in a department store, and she is so good at her job that everybody wants to work with her. And so she starts learning all the secrets of the women of the city. And then one day, I think it was the mayor's wife, looks at her and she says, you probably know something about everybody in this entire city. This is when she decides to basically write a gossip column under a pseudonym, becomes very wealthy, but she's also something of a gold digger. She just wants to be with very wealthy, influential men, but she will not settle down. Let's repeat that. She will not settle down. She is too selfish for that. She has many, many lovers. She never even tells Stella who Stella's dad is. The only thing that she will say about him is that he's a handsome man that she met in a bar. Keep that in mind for when we get into this subplot about finding Stella's dad, okay? We meet this gentleman named Mortimer. She begins dating Mortimer. Mortimer is a painter. And one day he says, Stella is an unexceptional person. She's not particularly attractive. She's not particularly talented at anything. She is not living up to her mother's expectations, but she's around 7 years old, and he says, you could be a great painter. Why don't you come to my place and I can give you art lessons? She didn't really want to go, but what 7-year-old would? She gets in the elevator, and this is our first clue that not all is well in the state of Denmark, because the elevator guy, it's like he's reluctant to take her upstairs to this penthouse or this apartment. Yes, if you catch my drift, he likes little girls, and he does things to little girls that should not be done to little girls. I personally do not know to the extent at which he does things to her. He has her take off her clothes, and he runs his hands all over her. We don't get much more from that. This situation continues for 1 to 2 years. Stella couldn't actually tell us because she's tried to block it all out. Then one day her mom looks at her, and her mother could care less about her, honestly, but she looks at her and she says, so does he ever do things to you that make you uncomfortable? And Stella goes, yeah, and then she never has to see him again. And that is it. So we're starting off strong with a problem. Does this come to light at any other point in the novel? Absolutely not. So did we need it? Absolutely not. It's just, and that's how I feel about everything that Reischl brings up in this novel. It's the why. It's where is it going? How is it contributing? That's that. I had a huge issue with that. Is it an uncomfortable topic for me? Absolutely. Did I like having to experience it? No. But my bigger issue was that it had no bearing on the novel whatsoever, so why did it have to be there? Personally, I thought Stella was underwhelming. If she was an unexceptional person, I felt like she was unexceptional in personality as well. A lot of that could be because she was stifled by a neglectful mother, but they do not have the best relationship. She even states that at one point she moves back in after college thinking, this could be a time for me and my mother to bond, only for every day Celia to say, have you got an apartment yet? Have you got an apartment yet? Have you got an apartment yet? Until she finally gets an apartment, and there we go. This is another thing I did not understand, except that it was the plot device that got the whole book going. Why did Celia leave Stella money? I do not know. Why did she say, not only am I giving you money, but you need to go to Paris and you cannot come back until you've spent all your money? Except for the fact that she was a disappointment to Celia, And so this was Celia's way of pushing her beyond her boundaries. But Celia, it was such a selfish person, I don't see why she'd care. It takes another year for Stella to decide, I'm gonna take her up on this. And it was more at the behest of her boss, who was like, you just need to go and do it. I'll hold on to your job here. It's the 80s. I guess she could do that. Stella gets to Paris and she's there a certain amount of time, but she's not really living life, and she's living very frugally, and she's living by Fromm's guide to travel as to how to eat and what to eat so that she doesn't spend too much money. So she's not experiencing, if you know Paris, Paris is about food and art and fashion and life. She's getting none of that. She's got this super rigid schedule that's full of boring stuff, but she's there. However, to just pause here a minute, the very beginning of this novel opens with Stella in Paris. She happens across this secondhand shop. She goes into the shop and this woman is like, I have been waiting for you. Personally, I did not like the way that the book opened. One, I didn't like that we went from Paris to flashback to New York, back to Paris. I wish we'd been a little bit more linear. Two, I thought it was a bit off-putting because I had no time and place to anchor me. So why is this woman looking at Stella, whom I don't know yet, and be like, I've been waiting for you? In some ways, it's a great way to open a novel because you're like, what do you mean you've been waiting for her? But I felt like Reischl failed to establish the scene and the setting, and therefore failed to establish me within it. I thought it would have been far more effective if we had just opened with this mother that we hate. Or maybe it would have been, okay, we did start in Paris, but instead of getting all of this backstory, we just get bits and pieces as Stella is going about her time in Paris. Because what happens is she's in this dress shop, and the woman says, I've got the perfect dress for you. And she brings out this vintage Christian Dior dress. And she says, this dress is one of a kind because unlike most dresses, which are given a number to denote where they are in whatever collection, this dress is given a name. And this dress is named after its owner. This dress is special, essentially like in Harry Potter, the wand chooses the wizard. This dress chooses the wearer. The first wearer was Victoire, who was the model that wore it down the runway. The second dress was Séverine. She puts on this dress and she does not recognize herself. And she's like, who is that woman? It freaks her out. She sheds the dress. She gets out of Dodge. So this could have been a very good moment where she is panicking over what she just experienced. And now she's like, why am I even here? I had a terrible relationship with my mother. How dare she leave me this money and then essentially force me into this act that I would have never done on my own because it's not who I am. It could have just been a little bit more seamless like that. But it's not. So now we are back in Paris. She has made that decision. She has tried on that dress. She leaves the dress behind and she's just like, mer, mer, mer. And then she finds herself back at the dress shop. I think she didn't even realize that she was on the same street, but then she saw something in the window and she's like, let me go inside. And she goes inside. She's like, oh, been here before. So the woman's like, I knew you'd be back. She has her put this dress on again and she goes, here's the deal. I will make a deal with you. You pay $6,000 for this dress. You go to these two places that I recommend to you, a restaurant and a museum, and if it does not change your life, you bring this dress back. I will give you your money back. So Stella does. She obeys and she goes to the restaurant. While she's at this restaurant, she meets this older gentleman and his name is Jules, or Gilles? Sorry, I'm learning French, but I have a terrible French accent. She enjoys her time with this gentleman. He kind of reminds her of Mortimer, which is the only reason that that little Mortimer side story even has anything to do with anything else. But she's enjoying him. He's harmless enough. They end up going to the Musée des Jeux de Paume. Again, excuse my pathetic French accent. And while they're there, she goes, I don't even know where to start. So he takes her to a Manet painting called Olympia. Olympia is the painting of this young teenage girl in the nude. This girl is staring out at the spectators, challenging them, saying, I am who I am, and honestly, I couldn't tell you. I don't get art. People were not happy with it, and they protested and whatever. But whatever the case, Gilles tells her that, so he had fought in World War II, and he had said that his plan, because he'd worked at this museum, and that his plan after the war was to come back and find out as much about this subject as possible. And her name was Victoire. Victoire is a romantic interest, a contemporary of Manet, but she's a woman. And here's another theme in this novel that we have to contend with, and that is inequality of the sexes. She comes from nothing, but she wants to become a painter. But because this is the mid to late 1800s, it's absolutely not going to happen because nobody will let her do it. Nobody respects her. She's not of the nobility or of the gentry, so she can't even try. So there may have been women painters at the time, but they came from wealth. In this painting, she is depicted in some respect or understood to be a woman of the night. I don't know if she was actually a woman of the night, but it's because of the thought that she's a woman of the night in the way that she is staring out, challenging people to tell her she's anything less than she is what caused the uproar. Well, Stella asks him about her, and he says that she actually did become a painter, in that she did showcase some paintings at an exhibit. And she goes, well, where can we find these paintings? He says, you can't. This is what he had intended to do after the war had ended. He just was never able to get around to it. So now she's like, I want to know about these paintings. I want to find them. I want to know more about her. The next day, they get back together to go to a restaurant. While there, this is really where she starts to second guess his motives, because she just doesn't understand, because he's a very wealthy guy. She doesn't understand why he would want to be investing time into her, basically. I thought this was a bit weak. I like Gilles. He was probably my favorite character, but he felt like a crutch. He felt like a vehicle, like literally and figuratively. All the traveling she did in this novel was because he had a car. I thought there was going to be more done with him because he has a son named Jean-Marie. From the get-go, I called it. I said that's going to be her love interest. Spoiler, at the end, there is a hint at something for them, but nothing is actually explored in this novel. And so that was the other thing, is it felt like this novel took forever, but then when I looked at how far into the novel I was like, I'm already halfway. What was my midpoint? What was that turning point that takes her from reactive to active? Like, I have no clue even what my goal in this novel is. And then the next thing I know, I have 2 hours left, and then I have 1 hour left, and I'm like, but what's happened? How am I getting to the end? How am I getting a resolution when I don't even know what the problem is? So we got to the very literal second to last chapter before anything was suggested between them, which is fine in some respect due to other parts of what goes on with that. But it felt like Reischl had too many ideas. I think this is her second novel. I thought she had too many ideas, and she didn't know how to harness them. It's like she wanted to put them all in there, and because she has a reputation and because this is a literary fiction, she got away with it. Which is when I hate exceptions. Writers always want to be an exception to the rule, and then you see the exception to the rule, and it's like, why? Why was there an exception made for that? Now I understand why there's a rule. So she flees. She gets away from him, and she goes back to the store. She returns the dress. The dressmaker's astonished that Stella wants to return the dress, and she's even more astonished when Stella goes, actually, yeah, I did exactly what you said, and exactly what you said would happen happened, but I'm taking this dress back and I want my money. Basically, that's all the money she had left anyways. So, yeah, I honestly thought that this dress was going to come into play more. We do have a full circle moment, but I was shocked that she brought the dress back because I thought this dress was going to be like Cinderella's slipper. There is a surprise that comes with this dress that I actually quite liked, but we could have used more of that. Like, if that had been the storyline, I would have been on board. Then she goes back to that museum because she just wants to stare at this painting a little bit more. She goes to the museum's gift shop because she says they have to have a book on her. Well, they don't. Or at least what they do have, it's super expensive, and it's really more about Manet than her. And the bookshop attendee says, you know what you need to do is you need to go to, what was it called? The Royal Shakespeare Company, because there's a guy there that I'm pretty sure he'll have something for you. Again, I should have done my research and I forgot. I think this was a legit thing. There's a lot of history in here, and there's some backstory given, and that was the other thing, is we got a lot of backstory for things. We had, as I said, we had so many characters. She's dropped a lot of historical figures and restaurants and food in here. It was overwhelming. But this little Shakespeare company had also been mentioned by Gilles because she was a copy editor and she had edited a book that took place in certain areas of Paris, and he was familiar with this book, and he was like, oh my gosh, I'm sure this little bookshop has it because I want to take it to this other person because it connects to this other person in certain ways. She goes and she meets the owner, George Whitman. She meets this girl named Rachel. She meets George's little daughter, Lucy. She learns about how he just takes in starving artists. He will not charge them room and board, but he does basically press them into labor in a way. So she's learning about the tumbleweeds. She's asking about a book about Victoire, and he doesn't really have anything for her. But he says, you know, I've got a friend that might know something. Turns out this friend is Gilles. Gilles is like, oh my gosh, funny running into you. He then invites her to come with him to Vézelay. I couldn't tell you why, but it turns out that's where his chateau is. She gets too drunk. She wakes up and she is in this unknown house. She goes down to the kitchen, and this is where she encounters his son, Jean-Marie. He has already mentioned Jean-Marie, how he and his recently deceased wife and Jean-Marie were this really tight unit, but something has happened and he and Jean-Marie no longer are on speaking terms. There's Jean-Marie hanging out, and he's like, what are you doing here? Who are you? Acting like he thinks that she is an intruder. Gilles comes in and rescues her, and then when she brings this up to him, he goes, no, Jean-Marie knew who you were. Because I was like, why is Jean-Marie here? If they don't get along, why are they in the same house? A household staff had called Jean-Marie and said that Gilles had brought a woman home, so now he's coming just to make sure that this is all kosher, and we're just set up not to like Jean-Marie, but I thought this was very superficial. We could have had so much more, but now we're getting into the understanding that once Gilles' wife had died, he withdrew. He was unable to be there for Jean-Marie when Jean-Marie needed it. Jean-Marie had already met a woman named Eugenie that neither Gilles nor his wife liked. They nicknamed her the Empress, gold digger at its finest. Since Gilles hadn't been there during Jean-Marie's time of need, he relied on the Empress. She poisoned his mind against his own father. What he's thinking is that Eugenie, and this is weird, there's a lot of different laws in France about inheritance, but the main thing is you can't cut someone out of your will, and if you have children, they all will get equal portions of your inheritance. The fact that Gilles brought a woman home, it kind of sets off alarm bells because, well, is he going to marry her? And if she has children, then how's that going to affect us? So it's basically trying to keep Gilles in line. While they're doing all this, thankfully, Stella does apologize to him because earlier when they had met each other, she was like, I gotta get out. I want to get out of Paris as soon as possible. And then she says something to the effect of, well, you know, I'm staying longer. He goes, why? She goes, well, honestly, I was just afraid to live life. And with you, I was afraid. I was a coward. That's why I ran away. I'm so sorry. So I was like, okay, Stella, at least you can say you're sorry. I like that. But Gilles, he instructs her, if you want to know about Victoire, go to the Bibliothèque Nationale. They have all kinds of information on painters and artists, and so even though you might not find something on her, you might find something about her. She goes, the librarian's a nasty piece of work, but she's there enough that eventually the librarian asks her why she is so interested in dead artists. She goes, I'm not interested in the dead artist, I'm interested in this woman. So back to that theme about feminism, they bond over that because of course nobody would want to give a woman her due. I guess I'm just kind of over all of this. This is a theme that is far too prevalent for me. It's no longer interesting, it's just annoying at this point. But if that's something for you, then that's great. On another note, right before Stella had gone to Vézelay, she had talked to the desk woman at her hotel, and the desk woman was like, here's the thing, we don't have extra rooms. You cannot extend your stay. So she goes off to Vézelay, and when she comes back, the front desk woman is like, where have you been? Blah, 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 blah. So she gets kicked out of the hotel because she has no room. Now she's homeless. She cannot find a hotel. She ends up staying at the Royal Shakespeare Company and becomes a tumbleweed. I got a little bit ahead of myself. She's trying to go to the Bibliothèque Nationale, but George keeps finding tasks for her. And this is when I realized we were going to go down a path that I didn't want to go down, and that was food. I love food, but this is when I realized we were adding yet one more layer to this novel, and it might not be in a good way. So while she is at the Royal Shakespeare Company, she meets this guy named James Baldwin. And James Baldwin is a writer who knew her mother when her mother had been in Paris. I think I forgot to mention that. Her mother had gone to Paris 30 odd years earlier, and she made a name for herself somehow. He mentions this chef that her mother had been absolutely in love with, and that there is also this other guy who had been a painter, but who ended up just writing cookbooks, and his name was Richard Olney. They had this big cooking to do. George is sitting in on this, and George goes, oh my gosh, what if that chef is your father? Where did that come from? We have had little to nothing regarding her paternity. And then all of a sudden, we have to get into it. And my thing is, if that had been a concern for her, if that had been something she wanted to know about growing up, I am all for her seeking it out. But this was not on her radar at all. And then all of a sudden, we're like, oh my gosh, this could be her father. Now we have that seed planted. And do you remember what I told you earlier about how many lovers her mom had had? She acknowledges this. So I'm like, why is it that this one man could be her father? What about all the other men that her mother might have been with in that span of time? That could be her father. He was a handsome man she met at a bar. That's not very descriptive. But we are going to leave this here because I'm at like the 40-minute mark, and this is kind of the middle mark anyways. So stay tuned. I will be back with the rest of this book. Bye!